Good evening. Welcome to the Costa Mesa Planning Commission meeting for Monday, December 13th, 2021. I call the meeting to order and ask that you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, great. Thank you. Anna, roll call, please.
Chair D'Erico?
Here.
Vice Chair Zick?
Here.
Commissioner Arith?
Present.
Commissioner Rojas?
Present.
Commissioner Russell? Here. Commissioner Toller?
Here.
Commissioner Vivar?
Here.
Please note that Commissioner Arith is here via Zoom.
Okay. Thank you very much, Anna. No announcements or presentations on the agenda this evening. This brings us to public comment. Public comment is for members of the public to communicate with the Planning Commission on matters that are within our jurisdiction but are not on tonight's agenda. Anna, do we have anyone in public comment on Zoom or by telephone?
We do have one.
Okay.
Linda, you may provide your public comment.
Linda, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Linda, and I just had a quick comment. Thank you so much for providing an updated, revised red line version of the draft element. That was really helpful. I just wanted to make a quick comment on Program 3F, motel conversions.
Okay, Linda, we're going to be dealing with that in our lone public hearing tonight. Public comment at this stage of the agenda is for matters not on tonight's agenda. So
I'm sorry.
That's all right, quite all right. So if you don't mind waiting a few minutes, and then we'll call you back up.
I will do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
No one else.
Okay, seeing that there's no one in chambers this evening, there are no other public comments. I'll close public comment. That brings us to Planning Commissioner comments, and we'll begin with Commissioner Rojas down at the end there.
I have no comments at this time.
Okay, Commissioner Vivar.
Yep. Is this on?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, just wanted to say that this is the last Planning Commission of the year. I'm glad to be here, be up here with all of you, and looking forward to next year, 2022. So great to be here. The housing element has been really interesting, and looking forward to all the stuff coming up ahead. Just wanted to wish everyone Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and thank you for your service, city staff as well, and for all of your support in my first few meetings here, and for all the great work that you do. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Toller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, and also remind everybody that Christmas is really largely a collective fit of nostalgia for comfortable, walkable, human-scaled urbanism. So I want to plant that in everyone's brain as you read picture books to your kids, as you watch Christmas movies, as you walk around Snoopy Town outside, and see all the little village setups as you move about for the next several weeks. That's all. Thank you.
Nice segue, Commissioner Toller. Commissioner Russell.
I too want to just wish everyone a happy holidays and remind you that with COVID kind of coming back, it may be a good time to go back to wearing masks more often and taking a few more precautions. But that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Russell. Commissioner Arith?
Thank you, Chair. I have no comments this evening.
Okay, Vice Chair Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank my fellow Commissioner Toller for continuing to plant things in my brain. They may be growing one of these days. So I'd like to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. I was really taken back and surprised by the decorations here at City Hall. I don't recall seeing it like that before. Music blaring. This was a pretty cool way to arrive. I thought that was very festive. And I wanted to thank Ms. Lee for connecting me with, and the commission with, the sales tax reports from the Finance Department. I've got several questions related to that, and look forward to interacting with the Finance Department to get those answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So just a couple of things for me. I agree with Commissioner Russell. It's not normally my habit to. I think the governor is or Dr. Gailey has issued an order starting December 15th for mandatory masks indoors. So it's not normally my habit to suggest people get vaccines. I figure I'm kind of the personal choice category, but I would urge you to reconsider if you haven't done it already, just so we can increase the number of people, at least have some protection, so we don't have to keep going in and out of these mandates, and we can kind of hopefully move along by sometime next year. I also want to wish everyone a happy holiday and a Merry Christmas and a great New Year. And be grateful for the things that we have, and remember the ones, the people that you've had in your life who are no longer here, and just be kind to one another, as I normally like to suggest. So with that, we'll move to the consent calendar. We have no items on the consent calendar tonight. So we'll go to public hearings, and we'll go to public hearing item number 1. And Anna, this is your first chance to read one into the record, so go for it.
Public hearing item number 1, City of Costa Mesa 21 through 2021 through 2029 sixth cycle housing element GP 21-01. Please note that no public comments have been received on this item.
Okay, thank you. We have Ms. Lee. Are you going to give the report, Mr. Dratkin, or?
I'll start out giving the report this evening.
Okay, very good. Ms. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Chair and Commissioners, as you know, this commission meeting is public hearing 3 of 3 for the sixth cycle housing element. We've reviewed the housing element update in detail at the past few meetings. Our focus this evening will be on the HCD comment letter that we received and summarizing for the commission the changes that we've made in response. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nick Chen with Kimley Horn, who will review a few slides. And staff is asking the commission this evening to make a recommendation to the City Council. Thank you. And Mr. Chen, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. It's good to be back in front of you. Just let me pull up my screen here, and we'll make sure that we can all see the presentation. How does that look?
Looks good, thank you.
Great. So as Ms. Lee mentioned, we are here tonight for a Planning Commission hearing to make a recommendation to City Council on the housing element update. It feels like a long time that we've been going through this, and we'll see on the timeline. Just a couple of the highlights of the process. We'll talk mainly tonight about some of HCD's revisions, State Department of Housing and Community Development, not revisions, I should say, comments that they made, and then the revisions that staff made or considered as he went through the process. So tonight we'll go through a little bit of background. I think we're past the point where we talk about what a housing element is, but we'll talk about where we've been in this process. We'll go through the housing element update process. We will talk about HED's review and the responses the city compiled as we went through the process over the last week. We'll talk a little bit about next steps, and then we'll open it up for a discussion and question and answer from the commission and the community. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about the housing allocation. As we all know, it's 11,760. That was one of the higher allocations for housing units in the SCAG jurisdiction, SCAG region. It is broken down by 4 income categories, very low, low, moderate, and above moderate, with actually sort of a 5th category, extremely low, as a portion of the very low income. Here you see the income ranges for a hypothetical family of 4 based on the 2021 median family income for the County of Orange, which was 106,700. And you see the unit breakdown with the majority of units in above moderate, but a good number, 3,000 in very low and 1,800 in low as well. So talk a little bit about our housing goals. These aren't the full text of the housing goals. If you want to see those, we've shown them before. They're also in section 4 of the draft document. And these were unchanged from what we provided to HE and what you saw previously. Housing goal 1 is really to preserve and enhance the city's existing housing supply. This goes to conservation and preservation of not only existing units, but existing deed restricted affordable and just what we might call naturally affordable units, or units that folks can afford now that maybe they wouldn't be able to if they were to move or housing conditions were to change. Next is creation and availability of housing for residents at all income levels, especially those with special housing needs. We've talked in the past. This is a little bit about meeting the city's arena, but really that's the next goal. And special housing needs could be anything from senior housing to large households, student housing, anybody with a condition that's not considered kind of your typical housing condition. And we're seeing more and more of that these days as people come up with unique situations and unique solutions to address housing needs. The next is identifying adequate sites for residential use to meet the city's regional housing needs assessment. There's a little bit more to that housing goal, but essentially it is the city's strategy for meeting their RHNA need, or the regional housing needs assessment or allocation. And that's the number of units you saw broken down in the previous slide. And then lastly is provide housing opportunities to residents of all social and economic segments of the community without discrimination. This goes on much longer in this program, but it does speak to fair housing, and the fair and equitable distribution and access to housing. So as we go through, we'll talk a little bit about the update process. We kicked this process off in summer 2020. It feels like a lifetime ago. We did a very robust community outreach process as well. Included 2 virtual town halls in November 2020 and September 2021, a community survey with 465 individual responses, subject matter expert meetings throughout February, and really I think we had a couple more after that as well. District-specific meetings in February as well, targeted focus meetings held throughout the update process, and numerous check-ins with either community groups, local organizations, property owners, development community, any number of folks who we could get information from. Individual planning commission city council study sessions in March 2021, and as you know, we've held a few more since then as well. And then joint planning commission city council study sessions in April and September. And then the housing element itself, the draft of it was submitted to HCD in October 2021, and a comment letter was received December 6th, just about a week ago. So a little summary of the public outreach comments that we heard. Accessory units or accessory dwelling units, often referred to as ADUs, should be affordable to lower income households. You'll see some programs that promote that intent. Overall, the city needs more housing. I think that is really the goal of the housing element process. There should be more bike lanes that support active transportation. This again was sort of tangential to the housing element, not directly related, but as we know, all of these are tied in together. Housing should focus on increasing quality of life for residents, and then need education about affordable housing to increase awareness and understanding, which I think really was key as we saw throughout the process, as community members and everyone brought forward their experiences with housing, and it really helped to inform the process. little bit more. We had need supportive services for along with housing. We were able to speak with a lot of community groups that provide services for community members, not just related to housing, but we found ways to tie that into the document. Overcrowding often occurs and there's a need for multi-generational living. We did address overcrowding in the document and looked at unique situations, just co-living for ways to provide flexibility in housing. Senior housing is a priority. There's a program to focus on senior housing, as well as one of the sites identified as a potential senior housing project. More affordable housing near transit and jobs. That was a focus of locating a lot of the sites along major corridors that have both the city's kind of more focused public transportation, as well as quicker access to jobs and grocery stores and other goods that folks may need without necessarily being able to or needing to rely on a personal vehicle. And overall need for more affordable housing for residents in Costa Mesa, both for renters and for owners. I think we heard that as well. So housing element update submittal. As I mentioned, the document went to HCD on October 6th, 2021. We received comments on December 6th, 2021. Staff worked day and night over the last week to address those comments and has the draft that you have before you. We will have follow-up meetings with HCD to seek compliance, essentially, to make sure that HCD is on board, but early indications are good. Next, we'll go through some of HCD's comments and the responses that staff have put together. This is kind of a summary. We'll go into more details on each of the next slides. One of the big things to point out is the candidates at housing sites did not change. HCD asked for some additional justification, especially on the larger sites. They wanted some more information, but in general, we're okay with the sites and didn't really have any comments about removing any. They just wanted to see more information, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But you'll notice if you look in the document, the table, that the numbers did lower a little bit, and where that is the ADU assumptions. HCD has a specialized kind of method that they've approved for counting ADUs, and they didn't say we necessarily had to stick directly to that. They just felt the city was being a little too ambitious with their assumptions, so they were lowered a little bit, and some programs put in to incentivize ADU development. More specific on program timing, this was a big comment. I think you'll see it on most of the programs where the city had previously put ongoing or something that was going to be tracked throughout the housing process. We have essentially replaced that with reviewed annually, which the city has to do through their annual progress reports anyways. So the status of those programs gets reviewed annually. And this is a little bit more concrete timeline. In a couple of places, we did add more specific timeframes for things to take place in the first 2 years or first 3 years of the housing element update cycle. Non-vacant candidate sites, the city added a little bit of analysis on non-vacant candidate sites to give HCD some more information on the viability of those sites. A lot of information added about fair housing. We'll cover a little bit of that a little bit later. And then we had housing programs that were added or modified as well. So go into a little bit more detail on everything I just covered right now, and that was just a summary. So on the non-vacant candidate sites and opportunities for redevelopment, this is a fairly common comment that many jurisdictions receive. And essentially the way that we added it or addressed it was we added an FAR analysis, just looking at the sites that were identified in the housing element, what's there now, and whether they're built to their max capacity or whether they may be underutilized. And as we sort of anticipated previously, but now are sure of, the vast majority of the sites are not built out to their full capacity and could, under even the current zoning, accommodate more units. This doesn't mean that this housing is going to be additive or that we're going to prescribe how housing may occur on these sites. It was simply analysis to say, are these underutilized or potentially underutilized? Also added some information on current market trends just relating to housing. This isn't specific necessarily to Costa Mesa, but to the region. Housing is a very regional issue as we go through. And then added a small site analysis. The city has identified a couple sites that are smaller than half an acre. We had anticipated these would be consolidated based on common ownership. We added some extra justification and then even some analysis showing where the city has previously worked to get small parcels together to essentially get a larger development. Added fair housing, local knowledge, and data as well. Looked through the analysis. There's a number of new sites and new data points that the state continues to put out regarding fair housing. Some related to areas of high segregation and poverty. You'll see a few new maps relating to potential areas, but overall there are not a lot of high segregation or poverty areas. I believe there's only one small area within the community. Include local dating and findings of community outreach as well. So went through and included information relating to fair housing based on the local AI and a few other informational pieces. Then analyze trends and patterns related to access to education and mobility. This was an added transit analysis just to see where the sites laid out in terms of access to transit. We had previously done this kind of informally as we looked at one of the measures for how we looked at the sites, but now we've added a map to kind of just further solidify that justification in the analysis portion in the fair housing section. And then list and prioritize local contributing factors. Contributing factors are things that may lead to fair housing issues or things that may cause, and in that case, need to be either addressed in some way or at least commented on during the document. So local contributing factors were derived and updated with a new analysis and data added to fair housing. So as we went through those different sections, if they warranted, if they created a potential or they highlighted a potential issue, a response to the contributing factor was added. And then lastly, we added programs to address housing for special needs groups and persons with disabilities. A couple of these were relating to, and we'll get to the housing programs in just a second, relating to transitional and supportive housing and how it was shown in the city's land use matrix and making sure that was consistent with the state requirement. So a little bit on program actions modified. We'll go into program actions added in a little bit. First was 3A, candidate housing sites information. This was essentially providing a little bit more information relating to the candidate housing sites and as well as specific actions to encourage housing on those sites. Examples of those were information made available, a list and an inventory made available to the development community. That list obviously is in the housing element already, but having an easily accessible way for folks to see where potential development could occur. Also, potential incentives in the document for people who meet the affordability requirements as outlined in the housing element document. So this is folks that would go above and beyond density bonus or even maybe potentially the city's inclusionary once that gets included. And it's things like streamlining or potential lowering of fees if money became available to do something like that. 3B, we added to the Fairview Developmental Center process, and essentially HCD noted that Fairview Developmental Center has been on the housing element previously. Obviously, there hasn't been any action to date. So in order to kind of solidify that as a good candidate site, they wanted to see a program listed. So actions are included there, which essentially has the city working with the state in the first part of the planning period, rather than pushing towards the end of it. Promoting ADUs, as I mentioned earlier, modification of the ordinance based on state feedback. So this is one program that actually you as a commission will need to consider in your recommendation because it wasn't currently put in the draft that you saw. It's something that will need to get added. We just noticed that today. HCD made a comment essentially that they believe the state's ADU ordinance is in conflict with state law, or it doesn't comply with state law. We should say it that way, maybe. So they said that they would provide specific feedback on how they believe it didn't. They haven't provided that yet to date. So a program will be added to address HCD's comment. We added project home key information into the motel conversion program. None of the stated objectives of it changed. We just added additional justification to show what the city is currently doing, kind of take credit as a city. And then Measure Y was identified as constraint to housing, kind of in two-way fashion, constraint to housing and constraint to the housing element update process potentially. The city added a 4-step process for how the city will work through the Measure Y process in relation to the housing element and overall work through a process that was very similar to a couple other jurisdictions that have similar ballot measures. So program actions added. 2J, as I mentioned earlier, we include transitional and supportive housing as a separate use in the land use matrix. Again, it doesn't change too much in terms of the city, but there are some of these intricacies that the state likes to see in terms of how cities define things to make it very easy for people to understand as you go through. Review of planning application fees. This is just that the city needs to conduct an annual review of planning application fees to make sure they're still applicable and that they're not becoming a constraint to development of housing. Development of housing for extremely low-income households. This is a program that focuses specifically on ways to try and promote or incentivize development of extremely low-income households. As I mentioned, this is the 50% of the very low-income need, and traditionally the most difficult subsection of the RHNA allocation to be able to get built in a community. Then review and revise parking standards for multifamily housing. HCD noticed, based on their experience, that the parking standards for multifamily housing may be a constraint, so they required the city to go in and review parking standards and revise them as necessary, or if necessary, to take a look at those. Lastly, was work with local organizations to connect low opportunity areas to resources. This is more of a larger effort than just the housing element, but in relation to housing, the city is looking to work with local organizations to kind of use their expertise and their connections to get low opportunity areas closer and with more access to needed resources. So next steps, really there is just a few left. So coordination with HCD on city responses and revisions. The city continues to work with HCD to go through these. The housing element will go to City Council if recommended by Planning Commission for consideration for local adoption. And then kind of simultaneously we'll resubmit the document to HCD for certification. And with that, we'll get to question and answer and any staff recommendation. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chen, very much. And just an acknowledgement to you and your staff for kind of the candle burning that you all did between December 3rd when we received the HCD letter and this evening. So I appreciate that very much. Commissioners, are there any questions of staff? I see Commissioner Vivar has, you have questions, sir? Your mic's not on. You need one more over to the right. There you go. It was on now. Yep. All right. Go back. On now? No, hit it again.
No?
There you go.
All right, great. Yeah, so great presentation. I was curious about that note that was made about the programs for disability housing. What specifically are we going to be adding here for that housing need, and what specific programs, or for what specific group of disabled people would this be available to?
So there's not a focus on one specific group. I think the focus is largely on both physical and developmental disabilities. Also looks at the city's reasonable accommodation process, just everything included with addressing housing needs for anybody who may have unique or special housing needs. It is basically the city saying, committing to do whatever they can to try and accommodate those who have different housing needs, make sure that they are able to have access to housing as well. So it is a broader program to look at the different ways as we kind of progress through over the next 8 years that the city can continue to do that.
Right. So, because I'm kind of curious, like if this would be specific housing set aside for people with disabilities, or would it just be, say, having ADA compliant dwelling units for, say, a mixed-use building or something like that? Would that count?
Yeah, I think certainly anybody who develops these days is required to meet ADA requirements for the buildings that they put together. So the city is going to continue to go through that process to make sure that developers are meeting ADA requirements that are in the building code and just required. Separate of that, there's also the discussion of how can the city work with either potentially developers who specialize in housing that is focused on residents who may have physical or developmental disabilities. Can you have additional conversations? Can you work with them? Can you help them to identify potential funding sources, or connect them with property owners who may be interested in this type of development? Essentially, what can the city do to continue to promote the development of housing for folks with either physical or developmental disabilities?
All right, great. I think that's it, Mr. Chairman, on me for my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Rojas, any questions?
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Commissioner Toller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, the first question I have is I noticed one big change here is on every program. We've changed the timeline from ongoing to annual review. And I was curious about what specifically that might look like and what kind of burden on staff that might entail.
Yeah, so I can answer that one, Commissioner Toller.
Sure.
Essentially, HED wants to see more concrete time frames as we go through. It shouldn't be, I say shouldn't be, but shouldn't be too much of an extra stress on staff. Staff's actually required to evaluate each of these programs and the progress being made towards each of the programs based on the objectives that are stated each year in the housing in the annual progress report. So it is essentially stating what the staff is already required to do, but it's a little bit more concrete, and HED has said that they will accept that.
Cool. Another question. Program 4H is new. That's on page 423, and I thought that was really interesting. It's really identifying, what do we say, community opposition to increased housing and affordable housing as a barrier to the production of housing. It's NIMBYism, right? NIMBYism, not in my backyard, right? That's a actual barrier that we've identified, and we're going to address it by, educating people about this, talking about this, airing out, trying to have productive conversations, I guess. So I guess my question, I think it's cool. I was surprised to see it. I'm just wondering where it came from, why we did that, and maybe just a little detail, if we have any, about that program, how we foresee it working.
Yeah, so I think the specifics of the program probably are still to be worked out a little bit, but where it came from was we heard it from the almost from the very beginning in some of the outreach meetings that we had, both the district meetings. I know when I did the district meetings, I heard it in the conversations that I had, that housing education is a big thing. There are a lot of we'll say myths out there, or constructions that people have about either affordable housing or just higher development in excess of what currently exists now, and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. So educational materials let people be able to just have more access to learning about housing, learning about affordable housing, who I think we showed in previous presentations, but who has these types of jobs that qualify for the different income levels, and really trying to just relate housing goals and the city's housing goals in a way that is easy for everyone to understand.
Okay. Last question. Page 412, we talk about the Fairview Developmental Center, and we say that we're confident that there is interest in developing that for residential uses. But in the case that the deal falls through with the state or whatever, then we got, what's the language say? We got to fall back on something. We got to have a plan B. If unsuccessful, it says identify additional sites to accommodate shortfall. Do we have would that default to some of these other areas that we've talked about that aren't necessarily included in the site analysis, like East 17th? Do we have specific sites or areas kind of on deck, or is that to be determined in that case?
So the city, as we went through and did the housing element update process, had, I think, originally more sites than are currently in the housing element. Not to say that those sites are going to be the ones that eventually go into the document, but some were located along 17th, some were located along Newport Boulevard further north, and some were located, I think, in the airport area. There's still programs to look at those areas and look at the viability for housing there. It's kind of a point in time thing too. 2 years from now is a long way off, and it really depends if the city is in a situation where they need the units for Fairview Developmental Center. Obviously, it's a lot of units that's been identified, but if for some reason the city has built a good amount of housing separate from the housing element sites, or a lot of affordable housing has come in and the city is not in a no net loss situation, then the city wouldn't need to essentially replace those units because there is a buffer, and we would have to take a look. Now, that's not to say if we got to 2 years and there was no agreement with the state that you should just stop trying to identify housing opportunities in that area. I don't think that's the intent of the program at all. But essentially, it's very similar to one that was done in Del Mar that HCD made comments on as well. Del Mar Fairgrounds, where they're looking to identify housing. They essentially just want the city to start considering a backup plan in case 2 years in they're still not able to concretely have a path forward. They want to be able to make sure that the city has room to course correct.
Those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Commissioner Toller. Commissioner Russell, you have any questions of staff?
Just a couple. First of all, I couldn't believe how much work you guys got done in a short period of time to get that, get all the answers to the questions. So hats off to you. My first question is, we changed the ADU numbers by about 200 and some units. Where did those units go? Did we just lower our extra units? Or can you explain that to me?
Exactly. Yep, absolutely. It did come out of the city's buffer that previously identified. Now, if the city continues to develop ADUs at the rate that was previously assumed, more in line with the 800 or so total over the planning period, or about 100 a year, then the city still gets credit for all of those units. It really is just making sure that the city wasn't relying too heavily. I think in the very beginning discussions we talked about, it was a very kind of aggressive number. We anticipated that HCD may have a comment about it, and they did come back and have one. We also got updated numbers through 2021. So we were able to use numbers of ADUs permitted through end of November for 2021 to get a more accurate kind of look at what potentially the kind of curve of ADU developments is. And it's continuing to go up, but it's slightly less than we maybe anticipated mid-year. So you see a little bit of drop off there.
Okay, thank you. The other question I had was the Airport Land Use Commission letter. Is that going to be a hurdle, an extra hurdle we have to go through to get it approved, or what's the situation with that?
So the city will have to, because the city has sites that are within the ALUP, or the Airport Land Use Plan, Airport Environs Land Use Plan, I think it is. The city will have to go through the ALEC process. Currently, the city actually has, I think this week, a discussion with ALEC.
Okay.
Nothing in terms of the sites that have been identified presents a huge issue or a huge hurdle for the city. There are some sites within the 60 CNEL, but residential is permitted in there. So we're basically have to go through that process and are currently working with ALEC.
All right, great, thanks. Those are the two questions I have for right now.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Russell. Commissioner Arith, you have questions of staff?
I do. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I just want to say how impressed I am with staff and Kimley Horn for all of this hard work. I can't even begin to imagine what you've done since the earlier part of this month. And it's just looking at the red line version, it's pretty incredible. So great job. I'll go ahead and try to make quick work out of several questions I have. But to start, if you want to turn to page 226, I was curious to know when looking at the figure, if there's a city program that specifically addresses extremely low poverty levels. Because I know we've been creating some new programs, but is there one that addresses specifically extremely low now?
There is, and I'll have to find the number. Just give me 1 second, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Commissioner Arith, in the meantime, I can maybe help out Nick a bit. There is, to start off with, there is Housing Goal 2 and Housing Goal 3, which both discuss specifically creating and facilitating housing for all income levels. So specifically the goals in mind have that, certainly all of the income levels in mind, so which would include the extremely low. And then the program 2B, which is the Affordable Housing Development Policy, or program I should say, It is intended to pursue state regional funding to provide housing for all income levels as well. In general, I think there was another affordable housing one as well. Nick, maybe you can add to that one.
Yeah, so there is program. I don't know if this is the one you just mentioned. Sorry, I was reading. 2L is one of the newly added programs, and it's development of housing for extremely low and lower income households. Essentially says that when funding becomes available, the city shall, basically provide assistance for qualifying developments where all units are affordable to 80% AMI or lower. That would mean that all units were either moderate or below, which again is basically a fully affordable housing development project, which while rare, through a collaborative effort could occur certainly. And then promote the benefits of this program, again, by providing information, by creating and distributing materials about the development process and how essentially that would work, especially relating to funding sources for extremely low and very low income households.
Great, thank you so much. Moving on to 2-31, Table 2. It seems to me that ownership versus rentership seems to indicate that we need to develop additional housing and affordability through condos and townhomes for sale. So aside from the first-time homebuyer funds from Measure Q sales tax, what can be done to help balance out this difference in rentership and ownership, or is that even the intent of this housing element?
So I'll start off and then maybe have staff supplement as well. Strictly from a housing element standpoint, I think we've talked in the past. It's not a focus of the state in terms of ownership versus rental. Certainly we've heard it's a focus of members of the commission and members of the council, but it's not something that we look at in terms of the analysis. That being said, the city can add programs separate to that if it was to be something that was expressed as a focus that the city wants to balance out. As you said, in the analysis, it shows it's 60-40 right now in favor of rentals. So as we go through, it is potentially something that the city could look at. I will say affordability related to townhouses and condos and ownership housing does work differently than I'll say apartments and other kind of typical multifamily options. And it is somewhat harder to develop and also manage as well, because it does continue through with the sale. But essentially, it is something that can be addressed, and we look to address the housing element, but we did not add a specific program relating to a focus on home ownership.
Okay. Well, I think one of the reasons why I point this out, and I've continued to point this out, in the comments that we've had going back and forth with staff, and then also in the last Planning Commission meeting, can be seen at the bottom of 236 under the heading Moderate Income Households. It reads, I'll read it for the public. Persons in households of moderate income earn between 81% and 121% of the county's AMFI, up to $133,500, depending on household size in 2020. The maximum affordable home price for a moderate income household is $377,000 for a one-person household and $558,600 for a five-person family. And then here's the important part, I think. Moderate income households in Costa Mesa would not be able to purchase a home in the city. In comparison to neighboring cities at this affordability or affordable range, moderate income households would only be able to purchase a home in Santa Ana. So I just find that to be pretty surprising. And I'm curious to know if there's any kind of, program implementation or supplements that we can do to kind of encourage more home ownership just beyond the Measure Q tax sales.
Nick, I'll try to take care of that one. Yeah, staff did talk about this, Commissioner, after your question, and I appreciate the early question coming in. With Justin and Jennifer and myself, we sort of explored some of the potential ideas. Like Nick mentioned, this is not a normal or a typical issue that the housing element would address, the differences between a rental housing versus affordable. The real goal of the state and affordable housing in general is just to provide housing. This is more of a wish for the community, and I think there's certainly been some discussion about that through the community, so it's worth responding to. So, and two of the aspects of potential encouraging the idea of a ownership pattern over a rental pattern would be creating provisions in maybe the inclusionary housing provisions that are upcoming, and even possibly the density bonus provisions that made it easier to add density for housing units for sale, or just other types of policies that would encourage ownership over rental. That was some of the ideas that we sort of came up with. The one concerns that we do have with that is, and again, I think Nick mentioned this a little bit, or at least he was leaning towards this, was what could backfire from that, from an affordable housing problem, or from a affordable housing situation. Rental housing is obviously an easier place to be for lower income individuals. So it would be something that you'd want to watch from both perspectives to see, make sure you weren't sort of kicking yourself in the butt, so to speak, with trying to create another community wish.
Sure. All right, thank you so much. Next question, if we can go to 394, bottom of 394 in the red line version. It reads, 2 census tracts on the west side of Costa Mesa and to the east of Placentia are currently identified as low income and susceptible to displacement. The southwestmost census tract to the west of Placentia is categorized as, quote, advanced gentrification, signifying a rapid increase in housing cost over the past few years. Why are we seeing this this area at risk of being displaced?
So I think, largely this is something. It's data from the Urban Displacement Project from Cal Berkeley from earlier this year, and it's one more data tool that got added. Essentially, what it likely boils down to is it's difficult to pinpoint an exact action, but what it likely boils down to is that this is one of the more, or was one of the more kind of traditionally affordable, not necessarily deed-restricted affordable in terms of high concentration of deed-restricted affordable, but just traditionally overall affordable areas. And because of the recent housing sort of boom, we'll call it, or increase in prices, it's an area that is starting to catch up with the rest of the community, and it may be an area that we continue to focus on, just to continue to monitor, because it's an area where potentially residents who live there now could not afford to either buy another house or get housing in that area because of added prices, of added just market kind of pressures and general market conditions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Next question is on 397 and 398. In regards to the estimated monthly subsidy to preserve at-risk units, I was a little bit curious to know if the city has a record of the units that need to continue being subsidized on a month-to-month basis and the ones that actually need to be replaced. This kind of feeds into what is the cost to the city given an inventory of sites that we're going to need to potentially demo.
Yeah, so this is it's a general cost, but the city does have an inventory. They're called at-risk units. So the city has both an inventory of all the affordable housing, deed-restricted affordable housing units in the city, as well as their affordability agreements and when they expire. So at-risk are any affordability agreements that expire within the next 8 years, or essentially within the planning period. And the city is required to work with the property owners to see what can be done in terms of funding sources to continue those existing affordability. The city obviously doesn't want to lose affordable units that they already have. And many times these agreements can be renegotiated, but it is up to the property owner. The city can make efforts to reach out and identify funding sources, or oftentimes continue existing funding sources that those property owners are currently getting. But ultimately, obviously, the city can't. They make their best efforts, but can't, guarantee that those units will remain affordable.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much. My next question, Commissioner Toller took it, so I'll go ahead and pass it on to the Fairview Developmental Center. And then going into 4-15 and 16. I just wanted to thank you for expanding on the program 3G section. I think the timeline is really helpful, and it'd be really interesting to see how more information comes to light in regards to Measure Y. And I think no doubt the public will be eagerly awaiting that information as well when it comes out. But I did just want to point that out for the public. If we go over to 419, I was just generally curious to know if the city's been coordinating with Mesa Water, the Newport Mesa Unified, and the Costa Mesa Sanitary District, and have they had an opportunity to weigh in on these drafts up till now? I think one of the things to kind of prime this discussion of why it might be important to do so earlier rather than later, if you look at somewhere like the Mesa Water District, they're right in the middle, coming in the middle of next month, they're going to be weighing public comment to start their rate increases, and now more recently levy additional rate increases through the county for their $70 million capital improvement project loan that they took out recently. And I'm just wondering if they've had an opportunity to see these data and actually think through the probability of these houses being built and how that's going to affect their rates, not just for the Mesa Water District that's going to be raising rates here potentially, but also the sanitary district that might be doing the same. And then for the Newport Mesa Unified School District that has to calculate, the potential for students in the district as well. So going back to the general question, have they weighed in at all and been sent copies of these drafts along the way?
So as we went through, these documents were available. I don't recall, I have to coordinate with staff to see if they were outreached to specifically. The program intent of 3.0 is the state requirement that the city notify and make available the document once it's adopted. Okay. But your point is a really good one. Actually, some of the jurisdictions, and we do have one of our CEQA team members on as well, who potentially has can expand on this a little bit, but some of the utility providers have provided comments already. I know I saw one earlier today. And some have actually considered the draft RHNA numbers in some of their forward-looking plans if they updated at a time when the RHNA numbers were known, and have basically said that there's an ability to accommodate, but I can't say for sure that each one has been consulted.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I would add to that, Commissioner Arith, just to be clear, these different agencies do reach out to the city and staff in particular as to development projections whenever they're doing rate increases. So Mesa Water in particular has the information regarding the city's RHNA and the intention with this housing element for their studies moving forward.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Moving along to the last couple comments here, if you turn to page 421. Goes back to something I may have asked earlier, but just wanted to see if we had an update on the estimated and projected sales tax from retail cannabis and how much is expected to be generated for the ownership housing assistance program. I don't think I received that last time we chatted. So I was hoping that Ms. Molina might have passed on some information about the projections.
Commissioner Arith, I can respond to that. As part of the fiscal year 21-22 city's budget for this year, there was a line item included for projected revenues related to the first-time homebuyer program. That projection at the time was $166,000 approximately annually. As you probably know, we don't yet have any permitted operating retail cannabis businesses in Costa Mesa as yet. So no doubt that number will get refined as we get more information.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Ms. Lee. And I believe, let's see here. If you turn to page 423, looking at towards the bottom of program 4I, what will be the supportive resources in program, actually, let me go off my phone here. This section references, quote, supportive resources and programs, but I don't see them really spelled out here. I know that this is a new section, so I'm not sure if we thought through all the details of this, but I'm just generally curious to know if you have any programs that might be applied for supportive resources and programs in this context.
We did not identify anything in particular. I think it's going to take coordination with the local organizations, community groups to decide and to determine what sources are out there. This program really does commit the city to looking at those and identifying them and then making that information available in discussions with those different community groups.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I think at this point, I'd like to ask Chair D'Erical if this is the appropriate time to make some additional comments or give staff some additional thoughts on things to add if this moves along to City Council.
So good question, Commissioner Arith. I think what I'd like to do is allow Vice Chair Zick to ask his questions, and I'm going to open the public hearing and have public comment received. I'm going to reserve my questions for the end of public comment. So I would suggest once we get through public comment that we'll circle back with you and you can then make suggestions to staff.
All right, thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Zick. No question. All right, so open the public hearing, and we have opened the public comment portion of the public hearing. We have a member in the chambers tonight wishes to speak, and then Anna, let me check really quick. Do we have members in Zoom or on telephone? Just so I know ahead of time. Okay, great. Mayor Guinness, good evening. Hello. Well, let me turn you, I'm sorry. There you go.
I saw 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
No, you're good to go.
Okay. There are a couple of things. Number one, the sites analysis. Or sites inventory. I was sort of taken aback that certain sites were not included. For example, 1 Metro West, which obviously would require a Measure Y election, but it's still in process. The Motor Inn project, and then there are various and sundry other smaller projects. HCD's guidance documents as to how projects in process are to be counted allows them to be counted if you are going to be pulling the occupancy permit during the planning period for the housing element cycle. Because now some of these may be on the cusp. They got a permit at one point. They got the certificate of occupancy during this planning period. Well, that means it's sort of optional, except for that our previous planning period only had 2 units, so we don't need to take 1,500 units citywide and jam them back into the previous planning period. And this is especially important because the Motor Inn had an affordability covenant, and 1 Metro, if it gets approved, would also have an affordability covenant, at least for a portion of the units. And so that should be in our cycle, and I don't understand why we would artificially reduce the number of units that we have under the existing zoning. Similarly, there's a project underway on Newport by the Best Western. But in any case, that makes no sense. But I'm moving on to the initial study. I find it astounding that, according, as noted in the initial study, we would be adding 47,000 new residents to the city of Costa Mesa. Those residents of Costa Mesa are not going to drink water. They are not going to flush the toilet. They are not going to need parkland. They are not going to drive in their cars. And if they don't drive in their cars, they're not going to use transit because there won't be enough buses. Let's face it, this just makes no sense whatsoever. The 47,000 people, they require a couple hundred acres of parkland. We don't have it. Where are we going to get it? That's a significant unavoidable impact. CEQA requires that you do your analysis as early in the process as possible. That's now. CEQA also requires that you not piecemeal projects, as was suggested in the mitigated NEC, that, well, we'll do it on a project-by-project basis as each one comes through. We're basically saying we plan on piecemealing. That's not right. And then finally, under the California Housing Accountability Act and various infill exceptions, some of the future studies that are projected in the initial study just can't legally happen. For example, under CRLAEF versus San Mateo on a review, design review and aesthetics review, they said you can't do it. I think I actually had 12 more seconds, but anyway, they said that once it's designated, you can't do an extra design review and change it and reduce a unit. You're stuck. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anna, members who are on Zoom or telephone?
Antonio Velasquez, you may provide your public comment.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, sir, go ahead.
All right. Hi, yeah, my name is Antonio Velasquez, a representative with Southwest Regional Council of Carpenters. Represent roughly about 100 constituents in your guys' city, as well as roughly 4,000 in Orange County and surrounding areas. We just asked that with this housing element that you guys require skilled and trained as well as local hire for these projects. It would also, if we are able to get local hire implemented as well, this would greatly reduce greenhouse or green gas emissions, and it would be great for your constituents as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Linda, you may provide your public comment.
Good evening, commissioners. Again, I apologize earlier for being eager beaver.
No worries, no worries, go ahead.
But I wanted to reiterate my comment, thanking staff for providing a red light version of the updated draft, which would really help the public easily identify what was changed. Also, unfortunately, because it was such a short amount of time for the public to review the draft, I didn't really have time to dive into the nitty-gritty of the draft, but I wanted staff to know that I will provide additional comments at a later time. And for now, I just wanted to focus on one housing program. At the last meeting, I provided comments on Program 3F, motel conversions, efficiency units, and co-living housing types. And I wanted to clarify my comments on this program. I saw that 3F was updated in the revised draft, and HCD is also requesting that the program include proactive actions. But again, like at the last meeting, I wanted to recommend that the city consider strengthening this program by including long-term resident protections through anti-displacement, right of first refusal, and relocation benefit strategies. Currently, there are 2 projects in the city that are under Project Home Key, and I understand that under Project Home Key program, there is a specific criteria that addresses displacement and relocation. However, for Program 3F, I'm actually trying to think beyond Project Home Key. The housing elements planning period is 8 years, which is a long time. It's pretty much a decade, and anything can happen within these 8 years. And there might be a proposed project that won't fall under Project Home Key. And if there is a proposed project to convert a motel, for example, a proposal that's similar to the Costa Mesa Motor Inn off on Harbor, I think it would be really important if the city has specific language in place that would protect long-term residents from displacement and include some type of relocation plan or right of first refusal for these residents. It's important for the city to just try to think long-term and beyond projects that might not fall under Project Home Key. And as we move forward with revisions, I think this is a great opportunity to ensure that we set the standards on the front end so that down the line we won't regret, end up saying, darn, that was a missed opportunity to protect these long-term at-risk, lower-income motel residents in the city. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Any additional speakers?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Anna, very much. We'll close public comment. I'll bring the matter up to the dais. I have some questions, and I want to begin with, we talked about planning application fees. I know Nick did in the presentation. I guess I want to have, identifying whether or not those fees represent constraints. Can you give me an idea of when we talk about planning application fees, what are we talking about? Are we talking about impact fees or just traffic impact fees, Quimby fees, whatever, park fees? What are we talking about?
Yeah, in this case, it is not, sorry, I'll turn my camera back on. It's not like you're talking about development impact fees. It is strictly fees involved with the planning process, processing applications. The city has a whole list of
right.
fees required as you go through the planning process for different kind of submittals. So.
Okay. I highly doubt that any of our planning application fees, particularly on larger projects, are going to be a constraint. I would, however, note that, and I'll save this for comments later, I think there are impact fees that potentially could be considered constraints that we ought to look at when we get to implementation. I want to see if we can get an answer to Mayor Guinness's questions regarding the exclusion of 1 Metro West from our housing opportunity sites, also the Motor Inn project. So I'm sure you guys kicked that around and you decided not to put it in. What was the thinking there?
I can answer that, Chair. Regarding 1 Metro West in particular, something that we talked about as staff after we released the housing element for public review was just this idea of reviewing projects in the pipeline. I think 1 Metro West falls within that category. Certainly it's been decided on by council, but there hasn't been a Measure Y vote. It hasn't gone through sort of the final stages of the process. So something that I think and really per public comments and the commission's comments that would be beneficial for a revision here is to include a description of projects in the pipeline. The reason that we didn't include it was that it hadn't made its way all the way through the process, and it's not necessarily something that we can commit to that would have building permits issued within the 8-year planning period. But certainly I think it deserves a description, as does the Costa Mesa Motor Inn site, which is really in the same boat. That particular site has grading permits, has been under construction for some time now, but in terms of certainty as to when building permits are issued, that's just something we weren't able to get to. But with, I think based on the public comment and the comments of the commission, that's something we can take another look at and include a section that's called, for example, projects in the pipeline. I think that's a good comment.
And
Okay.
sorry, if I can clarify
Yes,
to add on
go
to
ahead.
Jennifer's comments,
Yes,
the Costa Mesa Motor Inn project was actually reported to the state in our 2020 annual progress report. So we did take credit for those affordable units that did get issued in 2020.
Okay. And let me ask the question relative to the action the council recently took with respect to a couple of the motels on, I think they're on Newport Boulevard, relative to permanent supportive housing. Will those be in our, would we report those ultimately to the state if they come to be under Project Home Key?
We would, because they would be new residential units at that point.
Okay, great, thanks. So parking standards I want to address later in just my general comments. I wanted to also, I think I know the answer, and I'll ask it now, but I'll have a comment on it later. Email we received from former Planning Commissioner Fitzpatrick relative to Costa Mesa Sanitary District. And it's, I'll say, plans for the future in providing its services to the city relative to the growth projected in this housing element of additional units and population. I suspect, and this might relay back into some comments Mayor Guinness made about the CEQA process, I suspect that those items will be fleshed out in more detail when we have essentially 10, 11 elements within the general plan. I'm thinking most of them are going to need to be updated to address, from an implementation standpoint, to address the housing element. And I would think that that's at that point in time is when the other agencies in the city, Mesa Water, Costa Mesa Sanitary District, Newport Mesa Unified School District, would be part of the review of those general plan element updates and provide their comments at that stage. I don't know why why they would have contemplated what the housing element by itself means for the services they provide in the future. So maybe you can provide some clarification on that.
Yes, Chair, happy to. I think your statement is exactly correct. Essentially, what we have here in the housing element is sort of a high-level blueprint of housing opportunity sites. The selection of those opportunity sites were really responding to a myriad of state requirements. I think we've talked a lot over this process and with the community about the idea of corridors and looking at corridor planning here in the city where housing of all types would be most appropriate. And it's really more appropriate to have that type of conversation and any infrastructure studies that are necessary to implement that vision as part of a comprehensive general plan amendment and zone change. So that is our next step in this process.
Okay, great. I think that does it for me. Vice Chair, did you have anything you wanted to? Okay, great. So I'm going to close the public hearing. And I guess we'll start with Commissioner Arith. Do you have any just questions before? Well, let's do this. Commissioner Arith, do you have you had some comments you said you wanted to make after we get through the kind of the public hearing and the staff questions. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir, I do. Thank you. I have one question and maybe one statement.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Going back to El Metate, I'm still kind of curious to know why this wasn't listed, and more specifically, if the property owners were contacted and asked if they wanted the property included in the housing element, at least in terms of a potential mixed use space.
Commissioner Arith, the property owner was not contacted. The El Metate market was originally included, and really it's the shopping center in that entire area, not just the market. But that site was included as a potential housing opportunity site early on in discussions with the community. And we received a number of comments from community members who lived in that neighborhood that the market in itself was the only market in a very large area of the city, and their concern was identifying it as a housing opportunity site. So in response to that public comment, we did remove it from the housing element analysis. Having said that, that doesn't mean that when we do this future corridor planning, as we've discussed, that it can't be included in an overall sort of mixed use overlay, for example. It's just not something that we called out specifically here as an opportunity site.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Lee. And I think lastly, I'd like to circle back to something we heard in the last commission meeting on the local hire provision. I think after a lot of contemplation, I'm thinking that staff kind of hit it on the head, that anything that would limit the affordability of housing, at least in terms of a local hire provision, would potentially get us in trouble with HCD. So I would like to recommend that we not support a local hire provision as this thing moves along. And that's all.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Vivar, do you have any, well, you know what, let's do this. The chair is going to make a motion that the Planning Commission recommended the City Council adoption of the 2021-2029 sixth cycle housing element update GP-21-01, as well as adopt the initial study mitigated negative declaration prepared for the housing element update for CEQA compliance purposes. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the motion's on the floor by the chair, seconded by Commissioner Arith. We'll start down at the end. Commissioner Rojas, do you have any comments on, or questions even on the motion?
I do not, Chair.
Okay, Commissioner Toller.
Thank you, Chair. I am in support of the motion. I guess this is the last chance to say something before we do this. Well, I think it looks good. I think I read through everything and all the red. I read through all the red, and it looks like we added a lot of good stuff in here, especially program 3A. We just added a lot of specificity in terms of action items, in terms of timeline. I think it's more concrete. I did notice program 2M, which promises to analyze the impediment that minimum parking requirements have on the production of housing. And so I'm very glad that that made it in there. I'll just say a couple of things. I mean, Mayor Guinness wrote such a thorough letter on the CEQA stuff. I feel it's worth just touching on. I am very in favor of doing what we can to shrink our ecological footprint, of treading lightly on the earth, of all that stuff, depaving, rewilding our cities. Love that stuff. Very much in favor. I don't think CEQA is the primary means by which we do that. I don't think that's the best way. I don't think we want to put our eggs in that basket. I think that's fine because we have to, obviously, comply with state law. But we've been sprawling for the last 50 years in the worst ways. Single-use, auto-dependent sprawl all over Southern California, despite CEQA, right? And I don't mean this about anybody in specific, but a lot of times these environmental objections are really ways to make people think that people are the problem. People are an environmental impact, and I have an issue with that. People are not an environmental impact. I think sprawl is an ecological catastrophe, and density unlocks the tools to address that. And CEQA gets in the way of density a lot, especially the kind of infill that we're talking about. Rather, the work of shrinking our ecological footprint, I think, is through other means: zoning reform, complete neighborhoods, working for complete walkable communities, reducing auto dependency through zoning reform, through repurposing our public space, that is the streets. And to the extent that this element can further those goals, I think we're doing what CEQA was intended to do. We're meeting those same goals in better ways. One thing I did resonate with her comments had to do with open space that she mentioned. This is on handwritten page 25, up at the top, recreation. And this is very well written, and I really respect the time that she put into this. Based on the adopted desired parkland ratio in the city's general plan, this would create a demand for over 200 additional acres of parkland. The city does not have 200 acres available for this. Thus, existing parks and recreation facilities will be further crowded and overstressed. That's true. That's a good point. And this is why early on I kept trying to, and I don't blame anyone for not getting any traction on this transfer of development rights. That was kind of a wild suggestion for figuring out how to get more open space in our city, just moving these density allowances around using a financial mechanism like that. But the other thing I wanted to say is the public space is mostly streets, right? It's streets, and they're monopolized by fast-moving automobiles. And to the extent that we can figure that out over the next generation, we have open space all over the place. So I just want to keep us thinking like that. It doesn't have to be technically a city park for kids to be able to play. My 9-year-old plays football in the street in front of my house, and you yell car when a car comes, and luckily the volume's low enough so that they can do it, without too much interruptions. But our streets are public spaces, and they should be considered open space to some extent. Obviously not technically here, but let's not get too technical all the time. I'm glad we addressed Measure Y. And you think about the reason we needed, quote unquote, needed Measure Y in the first place is maybe because we didn't, we realized that we didn't know where we wanted the big projects to come in, and we didn't know how we wanted them to come in, And so we slammed on the brakes. And I think maybe in retrospect, that could have been a good thing because effectively it was a moratorium. I mean, in effect, right? And that was an opportunity to get our ducks in a row and figure out, okay, well, where do we want the big projects? How do we want them to land? How do we need to figure this out? How do we want to do it? And I don't think we, you know, it's hard. We're busy. Everybody's busy. So no blame meant there. But as a long-term thing, Measure Y, yeah, obviously it's an impediment to the production of housing. So I think we could figure that stuff out. We should figure that stuff out, where the big projects should go, how we want them to land, how we want them to define our spaces, engage with those spaces, lock in those answers through zoning. I think it's naive to think that the public will welcome big projects. I mean, we've grown to distrust big projects because most of the time, you know, the way I understand it, the two main objections are always, well, it's ugly, it's out of scale, right? There's the aesthetics. And then the other thing is we equate more people with more cars. And neither of those necessarily have to be the case. And I think we can, through thoughtful, good work, we could figure out how to allow big projects to come into our city without them being big and ugly and out of scale and without them necessarily causing flooding our streets with cars. There are good examples of big projects out there. I know they're hard to come by because there's so many bad ones. And so that's why I kind of understand the NIMBY side. I was scooting around the other day in Portland and saw, if anybody wants to go back later, Peloton Apartments in Portland. What a cool, spend 5 minutes scooting around that site, inside, outside. It's a whole block, so there's no back to it, which is amazing. And there's examples of good projects out there, and we just got to figure out how to lock in those principles, those characteristics of good big projects that work well, that land well, that benefit the community, and figure out how to lock those in through zoning or through design review processes. And I think we can deal with this in good ways. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you guys for listening, and thank you guys for all this good work you've done. Those are all my comments tonight.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Toller. Commissioner Russell.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to just say that while I know it was an incredible amount of work on the part of the staff to do this update, some of the revisions were really helpful in terms of the clarity, timelines, and what needs to be done, and that some of the deeper dives that were requested on disabilities, poverty, and ethnicity are going to be really helpful as we have our responsibilities for policy and zone changing in the future, along with the issues of gentrification and displacement. I know those are all things that we need to continually balance when we look at creating affordability and not displacing people and creating a better environment for all of us. So I'm looking forward to seeing how we implement this in the next 8 years. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Zick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think for anybody that's been following this subject in our meetings here has probably a pretty good sense of the areas of concern that I have. I haven't been shy about expressing them, but I've also been consistent about something, and that's what I'd like to start with, and it's thanking staff for the extremely hard work and professional work that you've done throughout this entire process. I've said before that anything that I say in this topic area that sounds like criticism has absolutely nothing to do with what staff has done, and I mean that sincerely. Staff was given a task to do that was near impossible. You put a plan together that if you read all the words, sounds like an incredible plan. You made the impossible possible when you read the words. But even HCD has questions about your plan. They're wondering about overcrowding. And I wonder how we deal with overcrowding at the same time we talk about high density. They're wondering about the likelihood of all these units being built in the planning period. Now, a lot of people are wondering about that. They're wondering about the sufficiency of water. Yeah. What is it, last year, year before? We were on rationing, could only water a couple times a week. Water district was literally driving around our neighborhoods, looking to see if anybody was watering on a day they shouldn't be. Yeah, electricity. If you've been paying attention to the news, you know the challenges that Edison is running into. You see what they're doing with changing pricing structures. So it's no wonder that HCD wonders about our plan. They asked you to use the metaphor of high jumping, clear a bar that's 10 feet high, and you did. Now they're wondering, well, how in the world do you actually do that? Well, because the words in the plan say we can. Back at the beginning, when this allocation was given to the city, and I wasn't shy about expressing my astonishment at that time, staff did something that I thought was noteworthy, but I think serves again as an example of how impressed I am with your professional abilities and talents and interest in having Costa Mesa be the best community you can make it. And that's because you put together an appeal of the RENA. Your appeal was complete, it was thorough, it was professional, it was fact-based, it was substantiated. And unfortunately, it was ignored. SCAG, not even HCD. SCAG received 52 appeals, 19 of which were from Orange County. All but 2 were denied. None in Orange County were accepted. They were denied. And in fact, as a result, our allocation actually went up. I don't know. I don't think they're listening. Pretty sure they're not listening. I'm a big advocate of local control, but that doesn't mean that we do what we want regardless of what the state or the federal government says we should do. That doesn't mean that. But it sure ought to mean that there's a collaboration and that the people above us in the governmental hierarchy govern and not rule. And I feel like we're being ruled. Former Mayor Guinness cited the number of 47,000 residents. I've been using the number 30,000 residents. Whatever that math turns out to be, 11,760 units translates into quite a large population growth. It's irrational. I've said that from the beginning. Even in staff's appeal to the state, they pointed out in their analysis of the methodology, they referenced the SoCal plan and what it says in terms of the number of households per year, 127 in terms of growth. RENA calcs out to 1467, 10 times that. How does that make sense? The Freddie Mac analysis cited in the appeal. indicates that our arena should be 4,485. Our allocation is 3 times that. How does that make any sense? I've heard an argument that says the people are here, not those 47,000, not those 30,000. There might be some people who are here that this arena allocation is somehow intended to cover. But what is going on? We think that by building a whole bunch of units, these people are going to come out of the woodwork. They're going to come out of the properties that they're sharing. They're not sharing because apartments aren't available for rent. There's apartments available for rent. There are houses available for sale. Why are people in that living condition? Cost. So we build 11,760 new condos, houses, apartments, and all of a sudden people can afford them? No, these people aren't already here. Now I've heard a final argument, and I'll close with this. A vote to recommend approval of this housing element update is a vote for local control. I think a strong argument could be made along that line. It's a vote for local control. Why? Because if we don't play ball with the state, we don't turn in a housing element update, if we're non-compliant, we drag our feet, well, they'll just take over, right? We don't want them to take over. So we need to put in a compliant plan that makes it local control. That's how we have local control. But there's a real fallacy in that. It isn't local control when you're being dictated to, and then you come up with a plan that somehow tries to match that dictation. Because this plan isn't what the local people want. In fact, they've gone so far as to say the Measure Y is an impediment. That's to say the vote and the voice of the people of Costa Mesa about projects is an impediment. The people are an impediment to what the state is dictating. Wow. I have no doubt this will be approved. I have no doubt council will approve this as well. But if there was a headline in the newspaper that said, housing element update passes unanimously, I think people would draw the wrong conclusion. And I think going along to get along sometimes makes sense. But I think there's a lot of historical references where going along to get along was the wrong decision. And I think this reallocation and our complicity with it is the wrong decision. And I won't be supporting a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Vivar.
Is it on? Okay, great. Yeah, I just wanted to thank staff for your time on this, time spent. I'm sure it was hours and hours. And thank you for your, there was something here in the staff report provided to us in one of the first few pages that spoke to my concerns last time of sort of impacts on small businesses and business areas, retail areas utilized by the community. Specifically to my concerns about Redevelopment last time, which is of course is, that Vista Center area isn't included in this anymore. But just the sort of idea that the needs of the community, I think, should be taken into consideration when we're planning changes to the city, or planning for them at least as we are here and in the document. And so I think that the staff wrote to included a response to me on that concern of mine. And I hope that moving forward, any kind of developments that happens in the city, or the plans for it at least, can have input from public, as we did very well, gathering public input on this document as well. I wish more people had been here in the last stages of this approval on Planning Commission to comment as well. But I'm glad that we at least gathered that information beforehand. Yeah, it's great that that was taken into consideration. I appreciate Mayor Guinness's concerns as well, and her letter, thoughtfulness. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think at the end of the day, this is something we have to approve no matter what, and I like that consideration was taken into what was written here from the comments of the community and my fellow commissioners as well. I just hope that whatever comes of this, whatever impacts we see in the future in Costa Mesa from this document, the next 8 years or so, that the projects will be ultimately reviewed by the community and public, and given and public comment really taken into consideration on potential impacts that they may have. The displacement concern, I think, is a big one. I think the vice chairman brings up a good point in that just because we're building a bunch of new housing doesn't mean that people will move into it if the housing costs stay as they are or continue rising. Having more housing may not be the solution to having people who are currently sharing apartments or houses to move into them. So I hear that concern and concerned about open spaces. No matter what, I think there are benefits to high density housing if it's done correctly, and that, like I mentioned last time, there's consideration into including local serving retail as opposed to regional, which would hopefully limit traffic, the need for people to go elsewhere in the city, have opportunities in the community for people to work and shop at. And a new development doesn't have to be just concrete and sidewalk and asphalt. I think we can think creatively about the things that will be built, including open spaces, green space, places for the children of the community to play in, for people to recreate as well. So I think that a lot of thought was put into this document, and there's never going to be something, I think, that ends up satisfying every concern of the community or of us as commissioners. But I think the fact that we are having a discussion about this and putting our ideas together is what it's about. It is putting our different viewpoints together, the different needs of the community, different groups within the community and the city, and seeing how we can best serve the community, and while also adhering to any kind of state regulations for housing and for other things that we may have to comply with. So those are just my thoughts on this, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. That'll be it for me.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Vivar. So I want to address the letter we received from Mayor Guinness's her comments tonight, which I have an enormous amount of respect for her knowledge of CEQA, but I would suggest that her letter was premature. There are jurisdictions up and down this state who are issuing either negative declarations completely, Sacramento, ironically, for one of them as part of their housing element, or MNDs, as we're doing. The bulk of the CEQA work, the full-blown EIR that's going to take place, is going to take place as part of the general plan update for all the other elements that we're going to need to look at. Land use element, circulation element, parks and open space element. All of those are the next step where we have to go in and adjust those to manage the number of housing units that we're planning for. That will be a full-blown EIR. The appropriate CEQA analysis will take place, but now's not the time. If we were Whittier just adopted their housing element, but they also did a stem to stern general plan update concurrent with it, and they did a full-blown EIR. That's when you do it. So again, I understand her argument. I think her argument, if we were doing, we were at that stage that I just talked about, then she would probably have a great deal of validity. But I think at this stage, we'd be a little ahead of our skis to say, you need to do more for your housing element. It's not the case. So we'll get to it. And that's when we start tackling all the fine tuning for all the different elements in the general plan. So anyway, I've had my say about that. And I think also in answer to former Planning Commissioner Fitzpatrick's letter, I promise you that the school district and Mesa Water and Costa Mesa Sanitary District, when we get to that general plan, all the general plan update components, will weigh in with their comments about how they're going to provide services to this, to meet this planning, the potential future growth in the number of units and the number of people that this housing element envisions. Keeping in mind that the housing element is not a mandate for the market to build these units. It's just putting in place the framework that would allow the market or public-private partnerships to build these units if they so desire. This isn't the state saying you have to build these. It says you have to plan for them, and that's what we're doing. Whether or not 11,760 units get built is another matter entirely. I'm not convinced they're going to get built. So I just don't think, one, there's enough natural resources to build 3 million units or whatever it is over the next 8 years. There's not enough labor to build 3 million units over the next 8 years. And so it's, we're doing the exercise that the state has asked us to do. I'm very pleased to see the work the staff did with respect to Measure Y. I'm going to be very candid. When Measure Y came up, I wrote a column in the Daily Pilot saying, I think it's a bad ordinance. I think it's not needed. It's really not wanted. And ballot box planning is bad. That's why you have planning commissioners. That's why you have professional planning staffs. And if the community doesn't like what the planning commission or the city council does in terms of approving development projects, there's a couple of routes you can go. You can qualify a referendum and have the project thrown out, or you can put it out to a vote through referendum. And if your council isn't listening, then you're not successful there, you can recall your council members until you get somebody up here who agrees with the way you do it. But to circumvent all that and just say, you know what, we want to have an ordinance where we can vote on projects. I promise you, you're instantly making it very hard for lenders to fund projects because they don't like the risk of potentially having a no vote. They're not going to give you any money if you have to go out to the voters every time. I promise you that there's many projects that have been on the boards for Costa Mesa that have not come forward precisely because of why? Because they're too scared to put it on the vote because they think whether the project's good or bad, people are going to vote no because it's more people, it's more traffic, blah, 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 blah. I've always said, my parents moved my family and my brother and my sister and I to Orange County in 1960 when nothing was here. I was just at Anaheim Stadium this last week with my son doing the links golf, you know, hitting golf balls off the level down in the field. And I stood onto the top platform with him. I said, you know, in 1966, I came to the very first baseball game I ever played in the stadium. I was in first grade. And I remember looking around, there was nothing there except Disneyland, Anaheim Stadium, and then groves for as far as you could see. Now, what would have happened if the leaders back then said, you know what, no more people. No, it's too crowded. I guess we would still have that. But at what point do we stop saying no more people and we say, you know, people do have a right to migrate in this country. They do have a right to come and go to live in a community they want to live in or that's near their job. So what I enjoyed back in 1966 is not the case today, and I like Orange County. I think it's been probably one of the most well-planned counties in the country. But there are plenty of communities that have said no for the last 25 years, and now we're paying the price because the state is waking up and saying, we have an economy that's dependent a lot on middle-income workers who are increasingly not able to live anywhere in California except maybe Hesperia, Corona, how far out you want to go, except we have a plethora of middle-income jobs here in Orange County or here in LA County. And we're saying, you know what, sorry folks, no more housing for you. You get to drive in your beat-up little car all the way into your job. And oh, by the way, good luck with that, because at some point, the state's saying you can't have a gas car anymore. You've got to buy a $50,000 Tesla and commute into your job. And oh, by the way, CARB is saying no more greenhouse gas emissions. We've got to cut everything back to 1990. So you have to take a bus, and the bus is going to be electric. All this stuff is happening because we're recognizing that our economy is actually dependent on people, believe it or not. From the wealthiest business owner right down to the retail clerk. And the reason we're going through this exercise now and we're getting jammed with a big RENA number, apart from the cute politics that got played, where certain Inland Empire jurisdictions and one mayor from LA decided, you know, let's push everything to the coast. We have an obligation to, one, follow the law. The city of Costa Mesa was created by California law. Every jurisdiction in California was created by California law. We exist because of California law, by state government. So we always abide by state law, whether we like the laws or not. And so, you know, I think that it's important that despite what you think of the RENA number that we got, which I think is insane, but I don't think it's going to get built anyway. But rather than lose all control and get hit with $100,000 fine a month to boot, let's get the plan in place. I think it's a good plan. Don't necessarily agree with the number. I think Measure Y, from my perspective, one of two things I hope happens, and the ad hoc committee I know is looking at these things, and we'll go out to the community. Personally, I think we ought to put a repeal on the November ballot, straight out repeal the thing, precisely for the reason I said. We have a process. Planning Commission, City Council, you don't like the project, qualify a referendum and vote it down. Or convince the council to rescind their approval. Or, and if that doesn't work, recall your council members. But I'm in favor of flat out repealing the thing. Barring that, what I would like to see is a set aside where projects that are being built on housing opportunity sites that have some affordability component are excluded from Y. The other element I'm worried about from a fee perspective is the duplicative parks and open space fees we have with our regular state mandated park fees, and then we have the Measure Z fees. And I think with the number of units we're talking about, the tab for providing parks and open space for a lot of these projects is going to be really, really high. I'm all for open space. I think they ought to pay their fair share state mandated park fees. But Measure Z was a gimmick. It was a smoke screen to kind of compete with Y. And unfortunately, where we're at now is those park fees that are in Measure Z are going to be a huge problem with respect to executing projects that come forward under this housing element. You know, some people like density, some people don't. Some of the best cities I've been in are very dense. My most favorite city in the whole United States is San Francisco. That is one of the most dense cities you're ever going to visit. But it's still got character, still got its districts. We can do all that. When we do our overlays and we do our specific plans, we can create spaces that are different from the other space down the street. So to me, it's actually a time to get excited about the future of Costa Mesa. Is it going to look markedly different than it did in 1953 when it was incorporated? Absolutely. Just like Orange County looks different. But, you know, progress is progress. It's, you know, change is change. My dad always said the one constant is change. And that's what's going to happen. And we ought to embrace it and try to control it to the extent we can, you know, and create a great livable environment for future generations when all of us sitting up here are worm food. So anyway, I'm ranting and I'm done. That's where I'm at. Anybody else? Okay, Anna, could you please call a voice roll?
Chair, if I may, just one clarification
Sure.
on the motion. I just
Commissioner
want
Lee.
to ensure that it includes the staff recommended modification to Program 3E related to ADUs.
Yes, and to bring that into compliance with state law, or what they perceive to be in compliance with state law.
That is correct.
All right, very good. Yes, absolutely. That would be included in the motion. Commissioner Arith, are you fine with that?
Yes,
As
I
the
am. I am
second?
curious. I am curious about projects in the pipeline as well.
Oh, to be added into the...
Yes, sir.
Yes, I believe staff said that they were going to do that.
Okay.
If the commission would like, they can include that in the motion or just as a comment to the council.
Just as a comment to the council, I think that's fine.
That would be fine.
Anything else, Ms. Lee? You good?
All good. Thank you.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Rojas? Yes. Commissioner Toller?
Yes.
Commissioner Russell?
Yes.
Vice Chair Zick?
No.
Chair D'Erical?
Aye.
Commissioner Vivar?
Aye.
Commissioner Arith?
Yes.
Motion carries 6-1 with Vice Chair Zick voting no.
Okay, thank you very much. Staff, I want to thank you. I know the last 10 days have been hell, but I do admire the amount of work. And Tarquin, I'm talking to you too, because I know you were buried deep on this stuff. I'm so proud of you guys, and you know, you made our job easier, which made your lives difficult. And I've been in situations where you're working day and night, and when your body starts to, you have an outer body experience about 36 hours in. I get it, I've done it. So thank you so much. I'm proud of all of you. I really appreciate it. Okay, that brings us to staff reports. We have no old business or new business, departmental reports. And we'll start with Public Services Report. Mr. Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, honorable members of the Planning Commission, good evening. Given that this is the last Planning Commission for the year, there's not much to report. However, for our Public Services Report, we would like to inform you we are entering upon the rainy season, and tomorrow will be the start of our first major storm event. In our area, we're probably going to get around an inch of rain, and our staff is making the preparations for this. For example, staff is out clearing debris from catch basins. City Hall will have plenty of sand and sandbags available for the residents. Staff will continue to monitor various locations as needed. Flood signs will be placed throughout different areas around the city, and maintenance crews will have standby personnel to patrol the hot spots tonight if we get heavy rains. So that's it, and happy holidays to everyone, and I defer back to the chair.
Thank you, sir. Happy holidays to you too. Development Services, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Just a brief report this evening. I know that the cannabis retail program in the city is of great interest to the Commission. I just wanted to report that we have approximately 60 applications for retail storefront cannabis in Costa Mesa, and staff are working very hard to process those cannabis business permits and conditional use permits. We will be offering briefings to the council over the next few months, just preparing the commission and staff for the presentations and public hearings that will happen related to implementation of that cannabis program. The City Council also at its last meeting, following up on our report to the Commission related to SB 9, the Council did adopt an urgency ordinance for Senate Bill 9, and staff is beginning to work on already the more permanent ordinance, and we'll bring that back to the Commission after some community outreach. With that, this is our last commission meeting of the year, so I just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and I will see you all back here in 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Try to get some rest. Mr. Preziosi, City Attorney Report.
Chair DeArcol, members of the Planning Commission, nothing to report. I'd just like to wish everyone happy holidays and Happy New Year.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Anna and Julie, thank you very much. Anna, stellar job. First meeting went great. And you guys have a great holiday as well, okay? And we'll stand in adjournment to our regularly scheduled meeting of January 10th, 2022. Good night.